Hey there, so have you been tossing around the idea of making a move here to Utah and you're really trying to figure out, hey, is Southern Utah, more down in the St. George area, going to be a better fit for my family and I? Or is living near the Salt Lake City area maybe going to be a better fit? Today I'm going to be sharing with you some of the pros and cons of actually living either here in the Salt Lake City, Utah area or living in St. George, Utah, down in Southern Utah, and we're going to hop into it right now. Mariah K here. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel if this is your very first time here. I'm a licensed and active real estate agent here in Utah, and this channel is literally everything you need to know about eating, working, playing, sleeping, and living in the Salt Lake City, Utah area. If that's of interest to you, consider subscribing down below and make sure you tap that bell for notifications so you're notified every week we drop a new video. We hear from people like you all the time who are looking to make a move, looking to relocate, or looking to buy or sell a property here in Utah, and we absolutely love it. So if you're thinking about making a move in a week, in a month, or even a year from now, feel free to give us a call, shoot us a text, or send us an email, and it would be our absolute pleasure to connect with you. So you're thinking about making a move to Utah, but you haven't quite decided whether being more in the Salt Lake City, Utah area, more up in northern Utah is going to be a better fit for you, or being down in southern Utah, closer to St. George. Well, today it is your lucky day. I'm going to be sharing with you some of the pros and cons of both of these. So number one, pro to living in Salt Lake City is simply the proximity to so many things. You've got the proximity to the international airport. You've got the proximity to world-class skiing. You've got the proximity to parks and rec and all of the different things that are here and around the Salt Lake City area. In St. George, you are going to have more of a limited experience with the, proximity to international airports. The closest international airport, if you are in St. George, is going to be in Las Vegas, which is about an hour and a half south of St. George, Utah. So for some people, they're like, hey, you know what? I travel all the time, either for work or for pleasure, whatever that may be. I need to be close to an airport. For other people, they're like, hey, you know what? St. George is actually a great fit. I don't mind being an hour and a half away from an international airport there in Las Vegas, and that's going to be fine. So just knowing that with the proximity. Speaking of proximity, if you are in St. George, a pro for many is the proximity that you have to the national parks. Yes, the national parks in and around that St. George area, you're going to be a lot closer to national parks if you are in St. George. So in St. George, about 30 minutes outside of St. George is Zion National Park. Yes, Zion National Park is about 30 minutes outside of St. George, which is gorgeous. And those 5 national parks that we have here in Utah are all down in southern Utah. So Bryce Canyon and Arches and Zion and Capitol Reef, all of those ones are down in St. George. So, or all down in southern Utah, which if you're living in St. George, your proximity to that is going to be a lot closer. If you are up in the Salt Lake City, Utah area, the proximity that you're going to have to national parks, you're about 3.5 hours away from the majority of those mighty 5 national parks. So depending on what you are wanting to be closer to could, determine whether or not Salt Lake or, St. George is a better fit for you. Number 2 is the climate. Yes, the climate in, really in Salt Lake and in St. George are very different. Many people that live in Salt Lake love going to St. George during the winter time simply because of the weather and the climate. Here in Salt Lake, you are going to have all 4 seasons. Some people love that, some people do not. You are going to get a lot of snow. This year that I'm shooting this video, 2023, we got a lot of snow. A lot of people that were living here were like, oh my goodness, I think I just got snowed out of, Salt Lake because it snowed so much. Other people are like, oh, you know what? I actually love the snow. My family and I ski all the time. So we had like an extended ski season this year simply because there was so much snow. Climate in St. George, you are going to have a lot hotter climate. Yes, it's going to be a lot hotter than in Salt Lake. So even during the winter time, rarely does it snow in St. George. Every once in a while it does, but it doesn't typically. If you go a little bit more north towards Cedar City, then, it snows there. There's a ski resort that's about an hour and 15 minutes away from St. George called Bryan Head. And locals to St. George usually go to Bryan Head to go skiing. So just depending on the climate that you're looking for may be a deciding factor. In St. George, the weather during the summer months is hot. It is hot, hot, hot. And when we're talking hot, we're talking 90s to 100s for months on end. In Salt Lake, that weather, you're going to see a variety. So sometimes, yes, it's going to be 90 degrees, but then you might get a thunderstorm and it cools things down for a few days. But you're typically not going to have multiple 100-degree plus days back to back to back in a row in Salt Lake, where in St. George, you can see, weeks and weeks and weeks of that 100-degree, high 90-degree temperature. For some, they're like, I love the heat. It doesn't bother me. For others, they want more of a temperate climate. They want more of a moderate climate. So know that going into it, those different climates is a factor. So we've got the proximity and we've also got the climate. Let's talk about job opportunities in both Salt Lake and St. George. Because St. George is a smaller town, you are not going to have as many job opportunities in and around that St. George area. In Salt Lake, you are going to have a lot more job opportunities simply because you've got the city there, and just south of Salt Lake, you have Lehi, Utah, which is home to the Silicon Slopes, a big tech industry. Lots of job opportunities have, happen in and around that area. Lots of startup companies in and around Salt Lake. So if you're looking for jobs, Salt Lake typically is going to have a lot more job opportunities than you will see in St. George. Let's talk about cost of living. When you're talking about St. George and you're talking about Salt Lake, typically Salt Lake is going to have, it's going to be a higher cost to live. The cost of living is going to be higher in Salt Lake typically than it is going to be in St. George, especially with housing. However, housing has gone up significantly in St. George over the years, and there are, more limited housing options in St. George than in Salt Lake. So Salt Lake, cost of living is a little bit more than St. George, but there are also a lot more housing options and opportunities in and around the Salt Lake area. So kind of know that going into it too, cost of living. In terms of next one, sports and recreation, I kind of give this one, it depends. I was going to say I kind of give this one a tie, but sports and recreation, Salt Lake has a lot of different sports and recreation. I mean, just hiking, biking, skiing, snowboarding, paddleboarding, boating, just a lot of different sports and recreation, not to mention all the indoor facilities that you've got with all the indoor rec centers that you've got in and around Salt Lake. Many of the different neighborhoods, many of the different cities have their own recreation center that have a lot of times, pickleball courts and tennis courts and swimming and gyms. A lot of times, and indoor tracks. Those are, big in the Salt Lake area. In St. George, I know of one aquatic center that's in St. George, and it's called the Sand Hollow Aquatic Center. And that one, it's an indoor swimming facility, but in terms of big, large rec centers, you're not going to see that as much in St. George. Yes, there are still incredible parks in both areas, but in terms of big facilities and in Salt Lake, you have the Real Salt Lake Academy and you have the Real Salt Lake professional soccer team that is in Salt Lake. So just the facilities and the different things that go along with that. You've got the Utah Jazz, the professional basketball team that's there. So you've got the Vivint Smart Home Arena that's there. In St. George, you really just don't have the infrastructure for those big facilities that you will see in Salt Lake. But if we're talking about outdoor activities, if we're talking about those kind of things in terms of hiking and boating and biking, right? Both of them have a lot to offer in the way of that. Both of them have, biking paths and running trails and hiking trails and a lot of different things for that. Like I mentioned, St. George has those national parks. They have some incredible state parks down there as well, where you've got this landscape of the incredible red rocks, which leads me right into the next one is the natural beauty. Utah's just beautiful in general. So when people are looking at like, okay, pros and cons of beauty in terms of Salt Lake or in terms of St. George, for me, I think they're both equally beautiful. I look here at the mountains and, you know, we've got snow-capped mountains here, which look incredible. And you've got a lot of open fields here. In St. George, you're going to see a lot of, you know, plateaus and red rock formations, which has a different kind of beauty. So when you're looking at those different things, again, for me, that's more of a tie. So hopefully this gives you an idea of really just some of the pros, some of the cons to living in both of these areas. We talked about proximity. We talked about, you know, closeness to international airports. We talked to, you know, proximity to the national parks. Really, when you're looking at job opportunities, Salt Lake is going to typically have a lot more job opportunities than St. George will, but St. George is more of small town feel. So depending if you're looking for more of a small town feel, in terms of outdoor activities, there's a lot to both places offer a lot in the way of beauty and outdoors and recreation. Salt Lake typically has more recreational facilities than St. George does, simply because, you know, it's more of that smaller town. So if you are thinking about making a move here to Utah and you're kind of still on the fence between Salt Lake, St. George, maybe even something in between, feel free to give us a call, shoot us a text, send us an email. My team and I work with people like you all the time, and we absolutely love it. Hopefully this gives you a little snapshot of just some of the differences and some of the pros and cons between Salt Lake City, Utah and St. George, Utah. Wishing you a wonderful rest of your day. Take care and have a good one. Bye.